Welcome to this introductory course to our full course, Solutions to Impaired Concentration. The purpose of this course, yes, is to give you a little bit of a teaser or taster of what the real course might cover. But I also wanted to get this information out to those watching so that when you leave this, having watched the full introduction, you already are better equipped to make better decisions for yourself and your loved ones in life. If you go on to enroll to the full course, Solutions to Impaired Concentration, and you're a qualified teacher in South Africa, you can also receive your 10 CPTD points. So who might this course be for, and what are your expectations? This course is most probably for teachers, parents, or for someone who is battling with concentration themselves and would like to help themselves. And so before any of our work, we want a goal. And I love this quote by Brian Tracy. So winners make a habit of manufacturing their own positive expectations in advance of the event. And so yes, when I can jot down what I expect to get out of something, then at the end I can answer, did I actually achieve my goal? And maybe this course's goals would be along the lines of to understand what concentration is, to understand the possible contributors to a lack of concentration, to find out more about different ways to assist children or people with concentration issues, to learn how to support people who seem to battle with focus, to learn and gain knowledge so that you and me and we might be more compassionate, and to develop strategies to better support children or people with concentration issues, and more. So our full course contains 3 modules, where the first we're going to be really looking at what concentration is it necessarily ADD, ADHD, and of course the causes and effect of concentration issues. We're then going to look at vitamins and minerals, food, brainwaves and neurotransmitters, as well as lifestyle choices. And in Module 3, we're going to be really unpacking it as we go into reflexes and fear and anxiety, brain imbalances, understanding the role of fear and anxiety, the different learning preferences, different personality types, emotions and memory, autism spectrum disorder. I then share from my own life a true life story, the damaging effects on self-confidence, and then we leave you with some considerations as we look at alternative therapies and options, and of course that next step, how you can find out more. Let's start at the beginning then, why not? What does it mean to concentrate? And so here we've got a little picture of a little one taking in all that he can and engaging in the world around him. And so how do we know this? It's because he is watching something and of course not getting disturbed by his environment as he takes in that information. So concentration is the ability to direct one's attention in accordance with one's will. This means control of attention. It is the ability to focus the mind on one subject, object, or thought, and at the same time exclude from the mind any other unrelated thoughts, ideas, feelings, and sensations. Concentration is a state in which one's whole attention is engrossed in one thing only and being oblivious to everything else. During concentration, the mind focuses on the object of concentration, and only one thought occupies the mind. The whole energy of the mind becomes concentrated on this one thought, and that comes from an article written by Ramez Sasson. So I thought I'd just put up some synonyms for concentration, and we see words like awareness, to notice, observation, consciousness, to heed, recognition, and attentiveness. So as we continue, I think it's really important to ask, well, how long should a child be able to concentrate for? Here is a beautiful little picture of a girl that we used to teach. It's the end of the day, and of course we can see she is completely worn out, not taking any more information in. And so childhood experts generally say that a reasonable attention span to expect a child is 2 to 3 minutes per year of their age. That's the period of time for which a typical child can maintain focus on a given task, and that comes from Brain Balance Center there, and of course the link included if you want to go check it out. This is so important because as a person who helps with grade R schools, with consulting with schools, and with students who are preparing to become teachers in the ECD environment. So often I look at lesson plans and daily routines that are not in line with this, where children are expected to sit for a very long time and remain still without moving, and of course quiet and focused. And of course we're going to get into all the problems with what I've just said. But before that, what does that mean? That means that your 5-year-old can sit for about 10 to 15 minutes, your 6-year-old for about 12 to 18 minutes, and your 7-year-old for about 14 to 21 minutes. What is ADD, ADHD? And I can hear some of you screaming that we no longer talk about ADD. And so please hold on to your horses, because in this course we do talk about ADD. We're following the works of doctors such as Dr. Daniel Amen, who have actually scanned brains and have mapped out the 7 different types of patterns that we get in those who battle with attention. And some of these include the hyperactive behavior, while others don't. And for this reason, we are still looking for this child who can't concentrate and yet is battling with attention. And so to bring you this answer, I scratched really around in my archives and I found this pamphlet that was given out by the Hyperactive Support Group of Southern Africa with some beautiful information for parents who might be battling with a child with ADHD. And so let's have a look at some of the things that they have to say. So what is ADD, ADHD? It's a term used for children with certain problems in common. These children tend to have academic difficulties and behavioral problems. Common problems include short attention span and distractibility, unless the subject fascinates the child. Another problem is that they can be impulsive, and this leads to further problems. So a child can have one or more difficulties that have a negative impact on their schooling and social activities. So here, getting back to what I was saying, a child can be hyperactive, which is overactive, and we all know that child. Or he can be hypoactive, underactive. Okay. Many of these children develop and experience problems in other areas of their lives, such as emotional, social, and family problems. They are often left feeling frustrated, misunderstood, and like they are failures. So what ADD, ADHD is not, it's not a learned behavior, it's not a discipline problem, it's not a spoiled child, it's not a temper tantrum, it's not an easy way out. And so what is it? Gifts of ADHD. Many children with ADD, ADHD are average, above average, and some are even labeled as gifted. They can be bright, imaginative, intuitive, lateral thinkers, and deemed talented. Hyperactive adults are often keen businessmen and natural entrepreneurs. Children tend to underachieve due to their related difficulties, and these children tend to develop emotional problems. Academic difficulties further cause them emotional problems. We see many children with ADD, ADHD battle with low self-esteem and confidence. ADD or ADHD children are not primarily emotionally disturbed children. Let's look at some of the symptoms of ADD, ADHD. So the inability to concentrate, especially when the subject doesn't interest the child. Hyperactivity refers to the child who is constantly moving without purpose. These children seem to squirm in their seat, rock and jiggle their legs, can't sit still, fiddling with hands and pacing. Get easily distracted. Seem to be impulsive and speak without thinking of consequences. May be excitable or unpredictable and can suffer from mood swings, tend to need instant gratification, whines and cries easily, can be aggressive and destructive, tend to suffer from low self-esteem and get frustrated easily. Often are labeled as emotionally immature and are said to be 2 to 3 years behind with regards to their emotional development. They can be very sensitive to sensory stimuli and can be sensory defensive. Children might battle with sleep and can even fear sleep. might have difficulty falling asleep, suffering from nightmares, and might be restless sleepers who even might sleepwalk. Battle to change direction towards a new activity, even when what they are doing is potentially life-threatening. We may battle to discipline these children, and it seems that punishment only creates more frustration, leading to more temper tantrums and rebelliousness. They are disorganized, often not noticing or seeing their own mess. They battle with regards to structuring their work and working through tasks and following through to completion. They often battle with the coordination of gross motor muscles and are clumsy. They may trip when walking or have difficulty playing sports. Their fine motor skills are also often poor, with poor hand and eye coordination. They might have difficulty with buttons, tying and fastening shoes, as well as with writing and drawing. They may have speech difficulties such as stammering, stuttering, pronunciation of words, or worse. They may be labeled dyslexic. Problems that affect academics such as auditory, visual, perceptual processing problems, poor comprehension, spatial disturbances, and difficulty with reasoning, as well as short-term, long-term memory problems. We also see social clumsiness. They battle to make friends and keep them. About 80% of these children are frequently thirsty. They might have allergies and suffer from asthma, eczema, hay fever, sinusitis, tonsillitis, and even ear infections. They often have high palates, little toes and fingers which tend to curve inwards, and can also suffer from bed wetting and swelling. I thought we would just look at this beautiful extract from the story TV Kid by Betsy Byers, the chapter entitled School Days, and particularly the test. This is how the book looks if you do want to read the whole thing. But what I'd like to do is just take you through poor little Lenny's experience. And perhaps as you think on poor little Lenny, you can, relate with him, or perhaps you can think about your own children or the children that you teach as they put into stressful situations. And of course, this all spirals out of hand. So Lenny leant over his desk, pencil in hand, waiting for the science tests to be passed out. He always got a worried feeling when he was waiting to take a test. Even if he knew everything there was to know about a subject, something that had never happened, he knew he would still be worried. He erased a mark on his desk and then penciled it back. He beat out the rhythm from the Addams Family, snapping his fingers when he got to the 2 clicks. He jiggled his legs. He turned to the boy sitting next to him and said, "Hey, Frankie, is the petiole the stem or is the stipple the stem? I'm mixed up." Frankie shrugged. He turned around. "Letty Bond is?" "The petiole is the stem," she said in a bored voice. "The stipples are the extra leaves." She clicked open her ballpoint pen. Then he turned back to the front of the room and raised his hand. "Miss Markham?" "Yes, Lenny." "Can we take our tests in pencil, or do we have to have a ballpoint pen?" "Pencil's fine." "But can we use pen if we want to?" He asked on behalf of Letty Bond, who he thought might be growing anxious. "Either one is fine." Lenny's throat was dry. The tests were coming. He put down his pencil, wiped his hands on his shirt, and picked up his pencil. He took the tests from the girl in front of him, selected the top, and passed the rest to Letty Bond. "Well, here we go," he said with false liveliness. He glanced at Letty Bond. She had already written her name on the top of the page and was ready to take on the first question. Lenny turned back to his desk. The test was mimographed in purple ink, and for a moment Lenny had a vision of another red 23 at the top of his. He let out his breath in one long unhappy sigh. He felt like writing the 23 there and saving Miss Markham the trouble. Glancing down the page, he decided to skip the first part, which was fill in the blanks, and go on to the second part, which was a plant with all the parts to be labelled. He had done that one last night for the school teachers, twice. Very carefully, he printed the word petiole in the line opposite the stem. Then he looked at the word. It looked wrong. Quickly he turned his pencil and erased the word. He wet his lips. He wanted to turn around and ask Letty Bond if she was sure the petiole was the stem. It seemed to him. Nervously he printed petiole back in the same space. He printed in 4 more words and then got up. With his eyes on the paper, he went to the teacher's desk. Miss Markham? Yes, Lenny? Is that word spelt right? I'm sorry, but I can't give you any help after the tests are passed out. Oh. He stood there for a moment, staring down at the word he had written. Stupal. He had never felt more miserable in his life. He gave Miss Markham a weak smile. He said, I feel kind of stupal myself today. I do believe, though, Miss Markham went on kindly, smiling back at him, you should look at what you've written very carefully. There may be something wrong. Thank you, Miss Markham. As Lenny hurried back to his desk, Miss Markham said, Remember, spelling counts, class. Lenny erased the word and respelt it. He filled in 2 more blanks and erased one. His test had now a worked overlook. He had worn through the paper in 2 places. He thought that anyone who thinks school isn't hard ought to take a look at his paper. He bent over his desk, wet his pencil point, and filled in another blank. He went on to the multiple choice section and filled in 3 of those. He glanced again at the word stepal. Time's up, class, Miss Markham said. Lenny looked up, startled. He turned to Frankie. Are you through? Frankie shrugged. Are you through, Letty Bond? I've been through since 10:30, she said. He glanced at her desk. She was writing a note to someone named Anne. It started, I'm bored. Then he spun round and glanced in desperation at his test. Only half the blanks were filled. Quickly began filling in the rest, guessing and putting anything down so that Miss Markham would see a full, completed sheet when she got his test. That was bound to make a better impression. Lenny? It was Miss Markham. Yes, he kept writing. He did not have time to look up. I have to have your test now. Yes, The next class is coming in. 1 more word. In desperation, Lenny kept writing. Cammy Hagedorn was standing at his desk, waiting to take Lenny's seat. Lenny looked up. Hard, huh? Cammy said. Hard for me, Lenny sighed. He got up, dropped his test on Miss Markham's desk, and went out into the hall. Shoulders sagging, he went slowly to World Studies. So perhaps Einstein, of all people, would be someone who could relate to little Lenny's story as we read this quote of his. School failed me and I failed the school. It bored me. The teachers behaved like sergeants. I wanted to learn what I wanted to know, but they wanted me to learn for the exam. What I hated most was the competitive system there, and especially sports. Because of this, I wasn't worth anything, and several times they suggested I leave. I felt that my thirst for knowledge was being strangled by my teachers. Grades were the only measurement. How can a teacher understand youth with such a system? From the age of 12, I began to suspect authority and distrust teachers. And so, yes, let's not be like one of poor Einstein's teachers. Let's perhaps be a little bit more like Miss Markham. So reading from The Disconnected or Disconnected Kids, written by Dr. Robert Malelo, we read here as well. Albert Einstein is considered one of the greatest minds of all times, but as a child he was far from brilliant. In fact, scientists now agree that Einstein had a significant learning disorder that today would have been diagnosed as ADHD and or dyslexia. He did not speak until he was around age 7 and did poorly academically all the way through college. When he failed to get into graduate school at the age of 20, he became a clerk in the Swiss Patent Office. But he didn't give up on his cerebral pursuits. Just 6 years later, he published the first draft of his scientific theory of relativity, which won him the Nobel Prize 10 years later. And as I said, From Disconnected Kids, written by Dr. Robert Malelo. He goes on to explain, and obviously he talks a lot about brain imbalances and primitive reflexes, but he goes on to explain how when they did study eventually Einstein's brain, they noticed that it wasn't different in size, but rather in the connections that they found within. And what they say he used to do was actually use music while thinking of equations and that, and so bringing in both the right brain and left brain. The dominance factor says this. So another book written by Carla Hannaford. According to researchers working with Albert Einstein's brain and written observations regarding his life, this is thought to be Albert Einstein's profile. So in our work, we teach teachers and all those who, of course, who come along to our courses how to do this. And this is called a profile. It's the way in which the brain will organize itself under stress. And so if we had to look at poor Einstein's profile according to this, we would see that he is not going to, the red circles represent where he's got a block. So under stress, he can't see or read, he can't hear, and he doesn't know how to take that next step. And so he will feel quite stuck. He thinks very creatively and very intuitively, needing movement to learn and experience all about the now and the emotions within which he understands the concepts. He can communicate, but the way he's talking, and we look at this with regards to the hand, would be to give you the story. And of course, we do hear that often when we read Albert Einstein's stuff, is the beautiful story and the colorful pictures that he brings to mind as he describes the world that he lives in. So yes, when he is calm, he would be looking for the detail, he would be listening for the detail, and he'd be working very methodically through all of the stuff that he is doing. But as he begins to process this becomes in that very experiential brain. And that is what we can see with regards to this little profile. So if you would like to be able to do what I've just done by looking at this little map, you would want to take part perhaps in our 2 Left Feet course. That's a short little workshop to explain some of this mapping and organizing of the brain. Other than that, I highly recommend this course of Dr. Carla Hannaford, The Dominance Factor. And of course, if you've done some of our courses, you might be eligible to do our OBO, Optimal Brain Organization course, where we really go into detail with regards to what we call this little brain bug, so that you as a teacher or parent would be able to map this out and interpret it in a matter of minutes. So with regards to what I understand about concentration, is concentration problems are actually the symptom, and we want to ask, why is this child not able to concentrate? And so we're just going to take a few minutes to go through that. So possibility number 1, ADD, ADHD. And so we get the inattentive symptoms, which include doesn't pay attention to detail or makes careless mistakes, doesn't stay on task, doesn't listen, doesn't follow instructions or finish schoolwork or chores, has trouble organizing tasks or activities, avoids or dislikes doing things that take a lot of effort or concentration, loses things, is easily distracted, and forgetful. If we look at our hyperactive or impulsive symptoms, we're going to see gets up from their desk a lot, runs or climbs at inappropriate times, has trouble playing quietly, always on the go and as if driven by a motor, talks excessively, blurts out the answer before even the question's been completed, has trouble waiting their turn, interrupts others. And later on we will discuss, but this sometimes might mean that there's too much theta in their brain, and this may cause anxiety, daydreaming, and the tendency to withdraw into one's own world. Beta can also mean racing thoughts. And here we go, just that little extract to show you. So the actual ADHD symptoms from the DSM-5, and there we have that inattentive, and of course that hyperactive, impulsive side there. So let's look at what anxiety can present as. So gets caught up in one's own thoughts and cannot pay attention to surroundings. Children who feel anxious cannot shift their attention from the dangerous environment to the less urgent task at hand. There's a theory that they tend to escape to their own world, which is safe. Anxiety results in a child operating in their limited profile, and that's a profile that we discussed with regards to Albert Einstein. As I say, once we know how each child organizes their brain differently for each task, we then can interpret it to understand what it is that we're seeing. So according to their profile, the child might become impulsive and act without thinking. And anxiety exasperates tics and OCD symptoms. Anxiety also ends up resulting as fight or flight behavior, where fight behaviors can present as lashing out. We can also see anxiety leading to careless mistakes and leads to children not being able to take in and recall information, so it looks like they didn't concentrate to start with. Flight also results in procrastination and task avoidance, and also we see a physical aspect of this anxiety as we notice a racing heart. We're going to look at reflexes just now, but of course this can also be linked and a result of the fear paralysis reflex and the Moro reflex. Okay, what about sensory issues? So sensory issues are often rooted in retained primitive reflexes, which we're going to discuss shortly after this. And so when you see the word sensory issues, we look at retained primitive reflexes. So no inside voice, constantly on the move, doesn't recognize a personal space, can be mistaken for ADHD, and these aren't my words, I actually got this off a post. So forms part of many labels which include ADHD, but also labels such as ASD, autism spectrum disorder. Battles to filter and process the stimuli, so the information coming in through the eyes and the ears, and of course what I'm touching. Battles with anxiety, and we get back to our reflexes, our fear paralysis reflex and our Moro. Make seemingly silly mistakes, and of course with regards to sensory issues, you can both be, you could be sensory defined or seeking or both. So this is one that I go on big time about, possibility for retained primitive reflexes, and I trust by now you can see how these are often the underlying cause of the sensory issues, the anxiety, and we're going to get to later some of our visual perceptual skills. But retained primitive reflexes, so primitive reflexes are reflexes or movements that the baby is born with while the brain is still developing. These moves help get the baby moving. The first two are very much in line with keeping the baby safe. And so when these are triggered, the baby is fearful for its life, basically. And so we can understand how fear paralysis reflex and Moro is linked to the anxiety that we see. When we have our children who are anxious with regards to separation anxiety, performance anxiety, anxiety in general, and there seems to be no reason why they're anxious, most probably it's going to be this reflex that's getting triggered. Beyond this, the other reflexes there, the other primitive reflexes are there to help the baby move through the developmental milestones. And so, yes, they're all there for a very specific reason. If they don't get the cue to become packed away, and I say packed away, they don't ever go away fully, but they get packed away because they're part of the survival kit. When a person is stressed, when there's a trauma, some of these are going to re-emerge as the body tries to protect itself. Also, as we get older and our muscles start deteriorating, we're going to see these emerge again as the body does its best to protect itself. These, when triggered, will interfere with the information coming into the brain for processing. So this is something that takes place in the body that affects the information coming in. So yes, later on I'm going to talk a bit about neurofeedback. That's the actual activity within the brain, and we can see if the brain is able, with the energy that it's using at the different sites, to do the functions that it needs to at each site. But that's at a brain level. The primitive reflex level is at the body's level, and so this information is already coming in all scrambled, and so it cannot be processed properly when these reflexes are being triggered and interfering with that flow of information from the senses, the eyes and the ears and whatever, to the brain, and then of course back again to the senses for, of course, the expression of our understanding. And so some of these symptoms, and I've included some really interesting ones for you to understand at what level can these affect us, include craving attention, aggressive behavior, learning difficulties, auditory perceptual difficulties, poor time sense, poor organizational skills, fatigues easily, difficulty sitting and concentrating, emotionally immature behavior, weak concentration, poor handwriting skills, cycles between hyperactivity and fatigue, attention difficulties looks like ADD, fidgeting, problems with short-term memory, poor thinking skills, labeled ADD, ADHD. So again, these children who've already been diagnosed, if we have to check them, they often have a whole lot of these reflexes that need to be integrated. Prone to emotional outbursts, easily distracted, focus problems, and work slowly. So possibility number 5, visual perceptual issues. And again, this is a result of our retained primitive reflexes. In this particular case, as we look at the visual, it's the interruption of that information coming in so that the body can then, or the mind can develop the skills. So we can see with this the link in my mind with ADD and dyslexia. And we're going to be looking particularly at the foreground, background perceptual skills there. So the ability to be able to focus in what's important, the foreground, and to disregard and filter out the background. These children will have a short attention span, will have concentration and organization problems, and will become distracted by irrelevant detail. And this is a problem. Most of our classes we're told to have posters up everywhere and have a bright, colorful, print-rich environment. But this does not help these children. And we're seeing more and more of these children as we see children who are not moving and integrating reflexes. And so when they come into a class that's full of colorful posters, they can't turn their attention from those to the board. And so what I remind teachers of is to create your board wall, or the wall where your board is on needs to be have as little extra information as possible so that you can really zone in to the information on the board. Even the teacher's clothes can be a distraction. So just to remember that as we dress in our bright color clothes and come to school. These children will have reading and reading comprehension problems. They'll find maths and story sums difficult. They will battle to discern between the relevant information and irrelevant information on a far deeper level than just on the visual, on that visual level. They will battle to use a dictionary and find their place on their page. They'll battle with categorizing and classifying, which further complicates maths issues. They'll lose their place when copying off the board, appear careless and lose their place when reading, skipping parts, and leaving out words or phrases. Number 6, learning style and personality. And so in our work, we talk about our right brain dominant person. That was poor little Einstein. These tend to be kinesthetic learners. They learn in a manual hands-on manner. And they learn through emotional connection and physical experience, often very tactile. So tactile exploration important for them. Now this is very important as you think about all things to do with concentration and concentration issues. What happens to this little right-brained dominant child under stress? So they lose the ability to reason well. They act without thinking. They become impulsive, feel emotionally overwhelmed, cannot remember the details, just like poor Lenny. So poor Lenny I would have mapped as a right-brained dominant child. May appear emotional. There was lots of emotions going on for poor little Lenny, and may appear spaced out. In our work, we further profile the children in terms of their personality type, and we see the number 7 as this child who has great FOMO, fear of missing out, never present in the moment, always scheming, always planning, always plotting, always thinking that there's somewhere better to be, and so their brain is always somewhere else and never on the task at hand. And so yes, these children often are labeled as ADD, ADHD. Or having those traits. And so we have to be very careful when we do, and this is why in our profiling thing, I'm not interested in diagnosing or anything like that. It's never been my plan. I often will find that these children who come to me who have got these concerns attached to them that they often might be a kinesthetic learner, a right brain learner, and if they're not very lucky, they've got the hat trick and they also have the 7 personality type. In terms of our personality types, we can never change our number. We can only ever work on who we are so that we can be thriving more, be coping more in life, as opposed to be stressing. Because when we're stressing, then we see obviously the more negative aspects of our personality come out. The second personality style that we see is our little 5, and he tends to be hyperactive and paranoid under stress. And so when I've got a number 5 and I'm hearing about all these concerns, we then have a look at how stressed this child actually is in his life. What about lifestyle and parenting styles? So the ADHD brain is apparently the nutrient deficient brain, and that came from one of the courses that I recently went on, and we were actual fact learning about GABA, but this became a side discussion as this lady went into her work that she does and what she finds. We also need to look, or you can look at a YouTube video called The Effects of Sugar on a Rat's Brain. There's the link. Very, very interesting as we look at all things to do with lifestyle. And of course our food and what we eat being part of that. In this video, it shows 2 rats. The first rat is eating what all rats should eat, and they put him into a little bowl of water, and in the middle of this bowl is a little flotation device. And so the first little rat, who's eating healthy foods, finds that little flotation device very quickly, and within a matter of seconds is on it and saves his life. The second one, who's been fed on a Western diet, goes around and around and around and around, and of course does this for some time before he actually finds that flotation device right in the middle of that bowl. And so I really encourage you to watch that. It is quite mind-blowing to see how our food affects the fact that we can or can't think properly. Lack of routine is a big one, and consistency. Lack of emotional development due to instant gratification and little cause and effect teaching, and that of course is our parenting style. We need to start being very predictable in the feedback that we give our children. When we are very comme ci, comme ça, nice Afrikaans word there for you, neither here nor there, where one day, we're strict on something, but the next day we're lenient, we actually don't set very strong boundaries for our children to be able to navigate and discover for themselves what is acceptable and what is socially antisocial behavior. Overprotective parenting, so this includes like not letting our children move and go play and get dirty as they should, and not allowing our children to actually practice and exercise their own skills to develop who they are. Lack of movement opportunities, as I've spoken about, this helps with integrating of reflexes, this helps with strengthening the core, this will go on to help with sitting still in class and being able to hold my body up straight so that I can go on to develop my finer motor muscles. Inappropriate expectations of teachers and parents, so perhaps children who don't have anything wrong with them, but of course they don't sit still as long as a teacher or parent believes they should, or when we of course are assessing our children with things that they're not yet able to do and we're setting them up for failure. Weak reward systems, so only rewarding the best, only rewarding no mistakes, and punishing children who make mistakes or in the process of learning. When we reward only the best and only the children who are, just like poor little Einstein said, sports people, we're going to see more of that, more of jealousy, more selfishness, more greedy behavior, more doing whatever it takes to get to the top. When we start rewarding perseverance, kindness, diligence, we're going to have far more of those, and we're going to build children who are more resilient, and even if they don't get it right now, they will persevere until they do. Stressed out children, here's another one for you to watch. So again on YouTube, 1965, effects of emotional deprivation and neglect on babies. So yes, it's not in English, but it's subtitled in English. You can go on to watch that and see how these babies who are so fearful of the environment can't shift their attention from the environment to the task at hand to learn. There's that link. Video games and TV games, or TV. Dr. Robert Malello writes about this in his book, Disconnected Kids, at a whole big section that is really mind-blowing. And as he talks about brain imbalances, he talks about how these things actually grow the wrong things in the brain. They stimulate the parts of the brain that we actually don't want to be stimulated. And of course, actually feeds into instant gratification and the sense of distractibility. Our fast-paced life, needing to do everything at once and never switch off, and having to multitask all the time. We also see toxins in the body, and so if toxins are in the body all the time, well, then the body is in a state of stress all the time. And so we need to remove heavy metals and parasites and these things that the body deems as threats within the body. The body will always be in fight or flight if it's forever trying to battle something that's within itself. We also see that we need to look at stuff like low iron, vitamin Bs, vitamin Ds, low magnesium, low potassium, low omega-3s, and of course allergies, which again puts the body into stress. What do we see in terms of neurofeedback? So in terms of neurofeedback, we often find that these brains have got theta, which is a slower brainwave. This theta brainwave is the one responsible for daydreaming. It also brings attention to one's inner world as opposed to the outer world. These people tend to be more creative. They tend to think in pictures as opposed to words. They can be more intuitive. They also tend to jump to solutions rather than going through the steps. So these are the children, they answer all the questions right on the maths paper and then they lose marks because they didn't write out the steps. And then when you ask them, why didn't you write out the steps? How did you know the answer? They can say, but my brain just knew the answer. And yet they're penalized for the way their brain is working. High amounts of theta is also an indication of anxiety. So we get back to that whole anxiety thing that we're talking about. Slower frequencies are often also found in the front of the brain. That's why we try to stimulate it. That's when these drugs are used to stimulate this type of this part of the brain. And so yes, if I've got slower frequencies in the front part of the brain where I actually am doing all my critical thinking, it's going to be hard for me to be able to do that. I'm going to be more impulsive because that's the part of the brain that actually controls my response to the world around me. In terms of neurofeedback, again, we don't diagnose, we don't label, we're looking for brain patterns. But the brain patterns that we often see in these people is also a very interesting ratio between our theta, our slow brain waves, and our fast brain waves. Generally speaking, high betas also result in a busy mind that can't switch off. And so, yes, you most definitely can have slow brain waves as well as these faster ones. And when beta is not as it should be at all of the sites of the brain, we can see further school issues such as language problems, retrieval of words and names being an issue, issues in basic math skills, issue in task completion and sequencing, issues in handwriting, issues in sensory integration, and we get back to those reflexes there again. And betas at the temporal can also result in anxiety and freeze or fight or flight behaviors. Hot temporals can affect also one's sleep, and of course this is also because of high betas that are found often at the back of the brain as well. If you do suspect ADHD, make yourself aware of the 7 types mapped by Dr. Daniel Amen. Each of these should be treated differently as the activity in the brain is affected differently. Because the different parts of the brain are responsible for different functions, so it's understandable that not all attention problems will need the same response. And so he refers to classic ADD, that would be our ADHD, inattentive ADD, so that's our ADD without the H, so battling to concentrate but without the hyperactive behavior. Over-focused ADD, so that person who gets stuck on something or who's over-focused on a task. Temporal lobe ADD, so now we start talking about the temporals, and in the temporals we see a lot of aggressive behavior or dark thoughts, and of course this could be something in addition to the concentration issue that you're seeing there. Limbic ADD, that limbic system tends to be all about bonding and connecting, and so these people often feel sad or depressed and have the inability to concentrate. Anxious ADD, so that says it, doesn't it? The child who's got ADD, ADHD, and yet you see he's incredibly anxious with it. And then the ring of fire. which is a very interesting pattern, which again, if you Google, you'll see it, where the activity seems to actually make a ring around the head. So yes, if you're interested in some of the stuff I've been speaking about, I have done a lot of research from some of these books I've read. So Change Your Brain, Change Your Life by Dr. Daniel Amen. He also has one which I haven't read yet called Healing ADD, and he also refers, as I say, to it as ADD, the breakthrough program that allows you to see and heal the 7 types of ADD. And another book which I'm still busy with, The End of Mental Illness. And of course, he talks about helping a whole lot of people there. The other book which I've spoken about this evening, Disconnected Kids by Dr. Robert Malelo. He is also a very interesting person who heads up the Malelo Method and the Brain Balance Centers in America. And he works with children with all different types of diagnosis and problems. I've also spoken to you tonight from the book The Dominance Factor, and of course Smart Moves, Why Learning is Not All in the Head. If you enjoy these type of things and want to know more, we've got this course, Solutions to Impaired Concentration, as well as NIM, Movement Facilitators, Brain Gym 101, Optimal Brain Organization. That's the one where you'd be able to map the profiles I was talking about. Hands-on, that's a brilliant course for teachers. Two Left Feet, a workshop for teachers introducing them to the understanding of how the brain organizes itself when stressed. Fundamentals Reading and Writing Pre-Skills Program. Unpacking Behavior, this one that I've been sharing with you. Autism, a short course, and movement-based learning course. It's been an absolute pleasure sharing this with you, and give me a shout if you'd like to find out more.